Hi, I'm Tyro Man. I'm at the Museum of Science in Boston, and we're here for the Pixar exhibit. It's running now at the Boston Museum of Science until January 10th of 2016. If you get a chance, come on down and take a look at all the exhibits. It's really a fun exhibit. Hi, I'm here with Alana Parks, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the Pixar exhibit at the Museum of Science. Hey, Alana, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay, so do you want to show us around?
Sure. So this is the Science Behind Pixar exhibit at the Museum of Science through January 10th. And you can see off to the left here, we've got a human scale statue of Sullivan and Mike from Monsters University. There are a number of these characters around the exhibit that you can stand and have your picture taken with. The exhibit's organized around the 8 steps of Pixar's production pipeline. So what does it actually take? Once they know what the story is going to be about, what does it take to turn that into the actual movie that you get to see in the theater? And so we're starting here with modeling, and then rigging, sets and cameras is off over here to our left, and the other 8 are scattered around. The rest of the 8 are scattered around the room here. So the key idea here in modeling is that even though we think of the models looking like this, they actually exist on the computer as numbers and lines. And so in this case, we see the Buzz turning into a wireframe, which is our representation of what he looks like in the virtual digital world, which is where all of the movies take place. There's a lot of different ways to interact with the exhibit. We have the characters that you can stand next to. We've got some physical interactives that you can play with. We've got computer interactives where you get to explore in more depth. And then we also have these great videos. And this whole exhibit was developed in close collaboration with Pixar. And they actually produced these videos for us. And so this particular one talks about how you go from a drawing to our virtual 3D model, and it talks about how they start with actually sculpting them in clay, because that's the best way to get a sense of what it's going to look like in 360 degrees. And then they sometimes scan in that model into the computer to see what that looks like then, and then turn that into our digital wireframe. So this is a 2-minute video that explains. So here are some of our favorite characters as they appear as the maquettes, is what they call the models that they make.
So do they keep all the models of all the characters they make in all the movies?
Yes. Oh,
Wow.
yeah, they have a fabulous collection of them that we got to pick our favorites. And we found a few of them that are sturdy enough that we made tactile models of them so that you can actually come and feel Joy or Carl from Up and get to touch the models as well. So this exhibit is called Pipeline, and it goes through all of the stages of Pixar's technical pipeline process, showing a clip from Inside Out. So here we see the story reel, so the story drawings that they create. They put them together. They actually create an incredible amount of the story in this phase of the process. But they work out a lot of the plot details, all of that stuff in story and art. Then we go into figuring out how to create that in the virtual 3D world. And so the first thing is the model and just what does the shape of the character look like. And so here we see Joy represented as a wireframe. The next stage of the process is rigging, and that is what allows the characters to move. So the riggers add virtual bones and joints, muscles. They even figure out how the surface flesh deforms as the character moves. And so here we have a representation of a virtual rig kind of like Joy's skeleton as she's moving around. And this is what enables the character to get into all of the poses that you see later on.
Now, is that what comes up on the little phones in the bottom of the exhibit?
The phones, those are assistive listening devices. So the square button reads all the text aloud. So there's lots of people who might not have English as a first language and can hear it better, understand it better from hearing, or people who have limited vision. All of the text is read, and then the triangular button has audio description. So for visitors who are blind, it also reads the text aloud and describes all of the images. Exactly, yeah. So the next stage of the process is surfaces. The appearance of the characters is created separately with computer programs that describe the color, the texture, the reflectiveness. You can see the sphere she's holding is going to be translucent, and you'll actually see some light refracting through it. And all of that is described with computer programs.
You'll have to come to the exhibit to see that one.
Yes, right. The sets and cameras, again, it's a virtual 3D world that they create. It's not just a static image, but a world that you can move around in virtually, and that gets all built out in the sets and cameras. The cameras work just like real world cameras do, except that you have to program in all of the effects, all of the lenses that you might choose get described. Well, the lighting comes later on. Turn around. The next stage is animation, which maybe you thought would have come a little bit earlier than this. But here is where the animators actually create all of the poses. Animators are Pixar's actors, and so they do all of they use the flexibility built into the rig to create all of the poses and expressions that bring the story to life. Some motion that happens on screen is very sort of tedious to conduct if you had to move, say, each individual hair frame by frame. And so some people write computer programs to control all of that motion. So, for example, Joy's hair is a computer program, the motion of her hair is controlled with a computer program. The motion of her clothing is also all a simulation. And there are a lot of other things, like the way the track builds up as she moves through. Have you seen Inside Out already?
Yeah, I've seen the movie.
So the track builds as the train comes along it. That's another simulation.
It's a good movie. Really good.
Yeah, yeah, I really liked it. And then I'm just going to do these two. So then the last thing that happens in the process now is the lighting, and that's where people add the lights to the scene so that it helps you focus on where the story is. It adds to the emotional impact of the story, and they also have to create many of the lighting effects, the way light reflects off of surfaces, because Joy glows. She's also a sort of light source as well as being lit by the light. So all of those effects get added in. And then the very last piece is called rendering, and that's we have constructed this incredibly complex world that all exists in the computer as numbers and data and computer programs. And what does it actually look like? So rendering is the process of turning all of that data into the final 2D image that you'll see in the movie theater by calculating the color of each pixel one at a time. So it's an incredibly time-consuming process. It can take up to 33 hours to render a single image, an average image might take 33 hours to render of computer time. So there's a lot of people who work on optimizing that effect as well.
Right.
So that's the basic structure of the pipeline, and then the exhibit is structured around those same themes. So there will be 6 or 7 or 8 activities that focus on each of the different areas. So you can go play with a number of aspects of lighting or of simulation or of surfaces and learn in more detail about how those things take place and what's involved in them. And so you can do that again through the interactives or through the physical interactives. There's videos that talk about some of the content, and then we also have some videos that are profile pieces of people who work at Pixar, who talk about what does it mean to be a rendering technical designer, and what is it that they do, and how did they get started in that work. So there's a really lot to see and do and learn. So this is another look at the whole pipeline process, and in an ideal world, it would be a sort of linear experience, and you would move from story to art, story and art to modeling to rigging, and then you would end up at rendering, and your movie would be done. But in fact, it's a vastly more complex process than that, and we've added a few of the kind of back and forth representations to that process to show some of the complications. So for example, the story may change a little bit, or the needs of the film may change a little bit, and the animators may get to find that they can't actually create a pose or an expression that they need for the story, and so the model has to go back to rigging, where they will add in a capability that was missing the first time. Or they may have thought that a model was only ever going to be seen in the background, and it turns out now all of a sudden there's this one shot where it's in the foreground, but they didn't make a highly complex model because that takes time, right? And so you need to build a more detailed model, because now all of a sudden it's in the foreground and you need to be able to see it up close. And you are suddenly aware of all the details that are missing from that. So it's a very iterative process, just like the development of exhibits is iterative, yeah. Which is one of the reasons why it was such a great collaboration with Pixar, because we have such similar ways of thinking about and doing things.
How did the exhibit come to creation? Like, was it Pixar's total idea, or did the museum approach them?
The way I understand it is that Pixar first approached us. We had done a Star Wars Where Science Meets Imagination exhibit that opened about 10 years ago. We didn't actually produce that one. That was produced in New Zealand, but we produced the Star Wars exhibit here. And so based on our work on that with Lucasfilms, there was some personnel overlap between Lucasfilms and Pixar. And Pixar, a number of years ago, developed an art exhibit that is currently traveling around the world. And the technical designers said, well, that's great for the artists to showcase their work, but what about how about us? How about showing all of the work that we do in the movies? And the person who knew of our work on Star Wars said, I know who you should talk to. You should talk to the Museum of Science in Boston. And so that was probably 8-10 years ago, and it took us about 5 years then once we started working on the exhibit to develop the whole thing.
Now, is it only going to be shown here at the Museum of Science, or this exhibit?
Nope. This is going to be a traveling exhibit also. Okay. So it's here through January 10th, and then it'll start on a 5-year tour around the country. And we have an option to extend that for an additional 5 years. So we're sure that it's going to go to about 10 museums in the next 5 years, and then hopefully, we'll cross our fingers, it'll go on from there.
Now, do they indicate like what part of the process takes longest, or is it just
I think it just depends on the movie. I know they spend a really lot of time getting the story as right as they possibly can before they start. There's always some little changes, but so I think maybe the story and art stage takes the longest. But again, there's so much interplay between the areas. As much as it's nice to think about them as discrete steps of the process, that I don't know that it comes down to, rendering is always, which rendering does take a really long time, but I don't know that I could parse it out that finely.
And how long how long does the process usually take to get the story from storyboard to the cinema?
Their movies generally take about 5 years in development.
I know they've done a lot of movies. You know how many movies they've done
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay.
Sorry. We can look that up.
All right, we'll check that.
14, and that doesn't count the shorts, which...
It's just where they started with the shorts, I
exactly. Think. Yes, they started with The Adventures of Andre and Wally B. That one I know.
One?
Yep.
That was the first one?
That was John Lasseter's first computer animated short.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Nice to meet you.
A song about never saying never and never being told what you can or cannot do. This is one of us. Before I got to fighting, or when fighting got to me, I looked to find examples on the field of chivalry, and I saw mighty arms, much stronger than my arms could ever be. So I thought perhaps that field was not for me. But still I stayed and watched the fighting till one figure stood apart, in armor newly fashioned and a helm more pot than art. But each blow is thrown with honor and the lightness of the heart. So I took that step which soon became a start. 'Cause she was not the biggest fighter, nor one to raise a fuss, but I remember being proud that she was one of us. And we might never stand together in a shield wall side by side. Because of her I lift my sword with pride. She was ladylike and lively, not the type you would expect, with a braver heart than many and a slot shot to respect. And I guess she'd once decided this was where she'd like to be, and I thought if she could do it, why not?